So I haven't talked to you. I've known you since I started working at Exos because you helped onboard me.
And you were our pioneer with at that time because we were figuring out how to onboard everybody virtually. And so we were using Bridge to come up with like a way to assess movement quality for our new hires since we couldn't be there in person. And you were like so great about like A, hopping into this company, but then B, immediately sort of piloting this camera in your house and all of these different exercises, figuring out like how can I like we had you were so creative with your TRX and with your bands and just like how do I rig up this stuff, and we were like so impressed. We're like, this is amazing. So we started using you as you know um, our demo person in a lot of our trainings actually.
That's so
So
funny.
yeah.
It's funny because I had nothing in my house. Like at that point, my roommate had just moved out, so I had no furniture, literally nothing, but I had some bed sheets and a pull-up bar and some bands. So
The
it was
bed
fun,
sheets,
honestly.
yes. I It was so innovative, but I think that that was like the true essence and spirit of just like what it means to be a coach, I think in a lot of ways, like, hey, you're kind of a MacGyver sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's what quarantine training was like, to be honest. So, my lovely guest today is Maureen Key. In my opinion, you're just this female boss, and you just kind of radiate this aura of like kindness, but also you're super smart, but you're not arrogant about it. So, I don't know, I love that. Um, do you want to tell us kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah, well, thank you, Emma. I so appreciate that. And it's funny because like I never self-identify myself sort of as thinking that I'm like a female boss, even though like I guess that's technically what I am.
Literally, you are.
Yeah, it's kind of like a cool reflection point. And sometimes you need friends to help remind you of that. So thank you. But
100%.
yeah, so I've been very fortunate, where I've had a lot of really cool opportunities. Sometimes like, I do try to keep it real where yes, a lot of it was timing, just being in the right place at the right time. But I mean, there is a component of it where it's a lot of your hard work and experiences that have also allowed you to be that right person in those right moments. So
Hmm.
I've been fortunate enough to start to kind of like carve my own path within Exos and like just my career in general, which has been pretty cool. Right now, currently, I sit on Exos' innovation team, and I sit on our design team, which is pretty cool. So it's a team of three, and I am the youngest and the only female on the team, which is pretty awesome. Um, and currently, I'm working on designing programs for all of Exos, actually, and we're starting with the app. So I don't do that in a silo, but I'm just sort of the orchestrator of the process. So
Hmm.
that's pretty cool. But also, like, I kind of do whatever they tell me to. So there's one of the reasons why I do love working for this company is just because there's a lot of like little pockets where you get to be a bit of a Swiss Army knife. So because I've been around for a while and I've picked up a lot of different skills and interests and areas like that, I tend to uh, get thought of, which I love for a lot of different array of needs. So about once a quarter, I might do this sort of project that might be outside of my regular asks, and um, that's usually like a pretty cool experience that I haven't done before, or I've done something like it. So there's all these opportunities to like stretch and flex a little bit, which I know being you definitely understand because Google has a lot of those opportunities too.
Yeah, yeah, because I remember you were like overseeing Google for a little while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I held two positions on our Google account, and both of those, like looking back now, I can see that they really helped prepare me for where I'm currently at. Um, but the first position was working on their digital app and overseeing. I was a people manager for our global talent on the Google digital fitness app, which is pretty neat. And the then that sort of transitioned. Like that's one of the cool things about learning about Google's orchestra, like infrastructure, excuse me, is
Mm-hmm.
just that like it's constantly boldly changing, and it's if something needs to shift or bend, then they're really good at being flexible to do so. So one of the positions that I went into, which was pretty awesome, was overseeing their Con Ed budget. And part of that was also not only overseeing the Con Ed budget, but then also like overseeing the partnership with Exos and the mentorship project, and then also their internship project. So that was pretty cool. Wore a lot of different hats for that, and I'm excited to see that all of that was work that was put in before me, and I was sort of like a bridge, and it's now like continuing to grow, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that's so cool, like about the company in itself, that they're so, I think you've really utilized it well though. Like you've worked your own way to kind of, like you said, meander and kind of see like, oh, where are my interests? Picked up some skills and like a skill set along the way. And I think that's something that it's really cool that you can kind of appreciate that too. Like you didn't stay on that job for forever, right? But it's like I can appreciate this about a certain, part of my job. And I think that's cool for everybody to kind of be able to look back on if there was a job that maybe wasn't your favorite job, but you still learned so much, or it kind of built your character up a little bit. Maybe it made you tougher, wiser, whatever it is. So I think that's so cool. I love hearing about people's journeys and kind of like how you've gotten yourself to where you are now. And I know for younger coaches too, right? Because there's a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really neat, it, and we don't have to like dive into like my whole experience or background or anything like that, but um, one of the things that I think that has made me a little bit more unique and able to connect better with a lot of our coaches has just been that, like I also was a coach, not only for Exos, but I was like an intern for Exos way before then. But I also was a personal trainer and a manager in New York City, and I did that privately and I did that commercially. And I got to, I mean, like that is a serious hustle. And those coaches and trainers that do that, they understand. And so it was that gave me a lot of perspective and gratitude for the opportunity that like I was able to have at Exos, and helped me to kind of reframe, which I know that we want to talk about a little bit more later, but like reframe like what is it that you value, and
Hmm.
how can I sort of balance my needs and my own values and set my own boundaries, um, so that I can live the best life possible. Because traditionally, strength and conditioning, coaching, personal training, like it's not a super lucrative field. And we've been sort of told that, like, well, you don't do it for the money. and,
Yep.
um, and it's also very exhausting physically, right? So I, I've gotten to see and do a lot of those pieces, and I truly still, I love coaching. It's something that like I genuinely do love. I remember that one of my bosses and or managers at a time, I asked when I first moved to, I've had like also a lot of managers, but like, so like when I moved first to corporate Exos, I was like, hey, do you ever miss coaching? And they were like, no, not at all. It's like, oh man, like for me, like that's just something that's part of my DNA. And I think like that passion, to want to help support other coaches really makes it easier to relate to coaches. So,
Hmm.
that's where, I think that I'm a coach at heart always. And then I think that there's a part of me that just like loves education. And so, I always try to like, help or collaborate where possible just to, support continuous growth. And I kind of do that in all aspects of my life, whether that's for good or bad. But
Protect your energy.
yeah, I mean, but that's so important. And I think that like
Yeah.
that's something in recent years I've really grown to appreciate, sort of like that, like you said, like protecting your energy and setting your boundaries, which is why I had to think about shifting from coaching full time. That was something where I started to realize that I worked a 6 to 3 shift. And by the way, like this is under probably the best conditions.
Yeah.
Like I'm sure a lot of people realize, like, oh, you even had set hours. Like, yeah. So
Right.
6 to 3. But over the years, that got very tiring. Like, I was in my late 20s, and um, I was single at the time too, so meeting people, dating, all of that. Like, if somebody wanted to have dinner at 7 p.m. at night, I mean, I needed to really shift my world around. Like I was like, okay, I need to nap. I need to have like a pre-dinner because like I can't eat that late, and it was a really big shift. And so that's something where I also realized too, like I had 2 young cousins, and one of them's my godson that I was very close with, and I would pop over there a couple of times a week, and they knew that I was like, the active adult in their life, and so they always wanted to play with me, and I would get in at like 4, and I'm like, I can't, like I've got nothing else, and
You, yeah.
and that's when I realized I was like, this is not sustainable, and the people that I love the most in my life that really matter the most to me, they're not getting my best self, right? I'm only like coming in crawling, like I'm needing to be filled by my family's needs and love, and I'm not giving them anything back. And, my clients are really getting the best version of me. So that's not that's not how I want to live my life.
Right.
And that's where I got really lucky. And like I also sat down and did like a ton of self-reflection and work, and establishing values, which I've since learned is something that a lot of really successful people do on a regular basis. So it's not always something that I prioritize, but I do try to make it a conscious effort at least a couple of times a year to like reevaluate like where are my values now that I'm at in life, and how am I holding myself true to them.
Right.
And that's so that was something where I started to really like look, and also like make it known, and to start explore other avenues of how else can can I stay true to myself and what it is that I want to do, but change up this lifestyle a little bit. Like how can I earn maybe a little bit more, but how can I also, like, I have a lot to offer besides just like coaching. And
Right.
that's where an education job sort of fell into my lap around product education. And that sort of evolved over time as well. So that's probably a lot there. I know, you get me talking, I'll keep talking. I'm so
I
sorry.
listen, I'm here for it because can you imagine how awkward it would be if you just like I asked you a question, you're like, yeah, this is what I do. But honestly, I everything you said I could not. Like I kind of find myself in that era of I actually recognize like I can't give and like my clients do get the best of me, but it was something I was able to acknowledge and be like, "Oh, whoa, like I need to pump the brakes. I have too much on my plate. I come home and I can't be anybody because I fall asleep on the couch at 8 o'clock and just wake up, do the same thing tomorrow." So, really learning how to say no sometimes has been huge. And I'm sure you can definitely relate to that. Even though you want to say yes, you want to be that yes person so bad because it sounds fun. You have to think about like your energy like a bank. You have to make sure you put more money in the bank or you'll go bankrupt. So same thing with your energy. And so everything you said, I really hits home, and I'm in the coaching business too. I'm sure everybody listening has kind of felt that way to an extent. And Exos is great. Like all things considered, best situation, but still you're on and you're performing in front of people. And every rep, I am very stingy with my demos now.
Hmm.
I used to like go all out with the weights and stuff, and now I'm like, all right, I want to make this a beautiful 1 or 2 reps right now because every rep counts, and I also work out, so it adds up over time.
Yeah, I mean, you just really need to nail like 2 to 3, I would say. Hit it, and then that's all you get.
Like, get really good with your cueing, paint this picture, just really refine it instead of demoing 5 times and doing that multiple times a day.
Yeah, or
That's a
I
ton of
mean,
reps.
that is a ton of reps. And, there's obviously like a lot of other tricks too, right? Where you can champion someone else in your class and get them like that's a super empowering move that also saves you some energy.
I started doing that for people who weren't paying attention.
Oh,
I'd
I
be like,
like that.
I'd be like, oh, so okay, like so and so, so show us how to do this. Or
I
like I'll do it to my regulars, but yeah, it's fun.
I would do that for a lot of the big explosive movements, especially like, when you start at 6 and when 1 o'clock comes around, you're like, I've got nothing
I'm
here.
tapping out.
I'm tapping out. Somebody else demo a box jump. Okay.
Right, right. It is empowering though. I really like that you brought that up because I think it's a really great coaching strategy to build empowerment in your group and like make them feel good because everyone likes to be recognized in a big group and kind of singled out in like a positive way. So,
And
yeah.
it's usually like I've found a lot of times that it like brings this camaraderie like you were talking about where especially like I mean obviously you want to do this in a group where you've already established trust. Um because if you start that off on day one, like that's very intimidating. It feels very
Yeah.
like gym class. If there's already this sort of like established trust, then I start to find that like a lot of the other people in the group will just be either like encouraging or they're making jokes. And, I actually have found other people like they'll be making fun of me as the coach. And so they'll be trying to point out corrections to the person, which is also really fun.
Yeah, yeah. When I mess up, I definitely point it out too. Or like if I do one rep really good, like the inverted hamstring stretch, when I my balance is on point, I'm like, y'all, I don't know, but I got lucky today.
Yeah, yeah. That's really great. Or sometimes when you know that you nailed it, like sometimes I'll just kind of in my head I'll be like, man, that looked so sharp, but I just kind of like walk it off, and then usually somebody might be like, whoa, and I'm just like, yeah, that's how it
It's
is.
coaches are perfect, okay? We never struggle. That's just the biggest lie ever. But
Oh, totally. And I'm totally joking. I'm human in
yeah,
front of all of my clients all the time.
it makes you more human and they kind of again builds trust to know that you're not perfect and you also mess up, but if you're able to correct it, for example, like I feel like that gives them more buy-in to an extent, just knowing that you're normal.
It- yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because like I think that younger coaches, and I know I definitely felt this way when I was younger, and earlier in my career, just and I tend to be a perfectionist on top of that. So there's just like a lot of a lot of self-built pressure. And that was something that not only would I try to like nail everything, but if there was an area that I felt a little bit uncertain of, like you just need to go through those trials and those reps, I think, and you learn from it. You throw things out there, they don't work sometimes. And it's it's okay. And it's also like okay not to be the expert 100% of the time too. So that's I don't know. It's challenging in the beginning because you're not always going to nail it. And I think that it's easier for me to say now, like looking back where I have over 10 years of coaching, like now I can say like, yeah, it's no big deal. But younger me, I mean, I was mortified of making any mistakes, and I was mortified of thinking like they're gonna, having imposter syndrome and that, my clients would think that I was a fraud or something like that, which is just, somebody said, and I forget I want to say that it was a Stephen Kotler. So I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's
Mm-mm.
um, he wrote the book Art of Impossible and The Rise of Superman, and it's all about flow state. And he oversees the flow state. Um, oh, sorry, the Flow Research Collective. But anyway, so I believe, said on one of his podcasts that in order to be an expert in something, you just need to know like 10% more than the person that you're working with. And that just made me feel like, yeah, it just made me feel a little bit more empowered, I think, when you hit those moments of imposter syndrome to just be like, who's my audience? And, what is it that they need to know and how can I help them? Even if I don't
Yeah,
feel like I'm truly an expert, like, how can I help them understand this topic a little bit more?
I love that. I actually, and I'm sure you've had this too, but I have one client in particular, but or a few, that they just ask me these really great questions. And it's basically like general curiosity of like, why are we doing this? Or why are we doing it this way today? Because last week we were doing this movement a different way. Or like, why did you cue me that way? They get intricate with their questions. I feel like I'm being interrogated, but it's kind of checking me like, oh, wow, like I'm really thankful that they asked me these questions because sometimes I don't know the answers. And in the moment, I genuinely don't know the answer to your question of like, what is a muscle cramp? Like, I don't know. I can Google that and ask people for you, but and I don't know, it's cool, I guess, to be checked like that.
But Emma, I'm going to tell you this. That's a super rare perspective that you have as a coach, which is that what I think makes you so good at being a coach, because um, you're not taking those, like you said, it can kind of come off as you're being interrogated. And if you have a really large ego about yourself, then that's going to be something that really like hits the ego and makes it fragile. And then what happens? That means that you shut down, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you can go in and say, I'm going to be open minded, I'm going to be curious about it, but more importantly, I'm not going to take this personally. Like that's a huge opportunity of growth for you. Like you flipped that switch in that narrative. And I'll even say, like, when I first started coaching, I had, because it was a new area for me in a lot of ways, right? So my self-esteem is a little bit low, and I'm feeling intimidated in a lot of ways. And what happens when you come from a place of fear is that then you lose that opportunity, that curiosity, that place to grow. But if you can look at everything that you walk into like it's a learning experience, that's one of the things that I was asked to share, like with our interns. What's a piece of advice that you can give when they were first starting? And I was like, just, which was advice that was given to me. So like, I mean, it's not my own, like, right? You pass all this stuff on,
Yeah.
but it's just to, like really be curious and make the most out of the time that you have, and just ask as many questions as you can, meet as many people as you can, and, you know, just soak it up as much as you can. So that's kudos to you, because like I said, that's a rare perspective, but the more people that can open up their minds in those places, like they're the ones that are really going places.
Yeah. To your point, like it is easy to feel insecure and I oftentimes still do feel insecure just because I feel like that's the nature of comparatism, like compared to people and people on the internet showcasing their highlights. But, you know, it's kind of like a split second decision of like when I get these questions, is like, ooh, I guard up. And then I'm like, oh, but they're genuinely just want to know. So I think like what you said also, like before when I was younger, absolutely not. I would take that the wrong way. But it's cool to finally have the autonomy and like understand you have the choice to decide how you want to take those situations.
Yeah,
And
and
then plus it's a better time up here too if you make that decision.
totally. For your listeners, you pointed to your head.
Well, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so I was pointing to my head, guys. Better time for my mental health. Um yeah, I forgot that. This is going to go on YouTube, by the way.
Oh, sweet.
So, I'm trying to get this on Apple Podcasts, but that's a whole thing you have to go through, like submission and then get approved. So, we're in this season of learning, really lost in this wonderful conversation. But I wanted to do an icebreaker, and it's not really an icebreaker anymore. It's more like a fun facts. So, this is my favorite question. What's your favorite burner on the stove? This is a real adult question.
I have to know like why that's your question.
I've just seen I've just seen memes about it, and then I've never related to a meme so much in my life where it's like, wow, I use this one burner every single day. And
Uh,
so now I want to know.
yeah. So for me on mine, it would be the bottom left. And the reason being, I have eggs almost daily, and that fits my little smaller frying pan. So that one's probably the one that gets the most love.
It's like always the dirtiest too. It's
Yep.
like, yeah, I'm the same, bottom left. But it depends, like it depends on the stovetop that you have. Sometimes like your pan doesn't fit well on it, and then that's a deterrent. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's funny.
Okay.
But it's important because so for instance, this was actually something talk about like ridiculous adult things. But at one point, I have like wooden floors in my kitchen, and so I wanted to get like like those cushioned mats to stand on, and I had trouble like figuring out like where to place them and all of that. And the question kind of came up when I was asking my friends, like, where do I put this? I'm sending like videos. They're like, does this look dumb? And they're like, well, what burner do you use? I was like, well, it should be underneath that one because that's where you're going to be standing.
This is the most important adult question. It's gonna come up in life many times, and then you're gonna move and get a different stove, and it's just gonna be a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Get used to a different burner.
And then it changes like the flow of the kitchen, right? Like I literally just
Right.
reorganized everything. And so like
I
just,
get that.
you know,
This is
mhm.
real. I'm moving on Monday, so I'm gonna have to figure that out all over again. Okay, second question, second and last one. What's your favorite sauce right now? Like, it's not like ketchup or mustard, but just like something that's unique.
Okay, so it's not really like a sauce. So also heads up, this is one part of me that I don't know that I fully embrace it. I do embrace this about myself, but I would like to improve upon this.
Okay, I'm excited.
I'm not really like a cooker. Like, in the kitchen, it's not an area. It's actually an area of a lot of intimidation for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't get like too creative or out there. So I'm gonna say, for the sake of this, I'm gonna use a salsa versus a sauce. And I kind of like mango pineapple salsa.
That is valid. That works. That's still, I would consider that kind of a sauce. Like that, is it Trader Joe's?
Trader Joe's has a really great one, but sometimes so I'm in the Northeast region, and so we have
Mm,
Wegmans here, which is phenomenal. I'm
yes,
gonna just go on air and say it's like the best grocery store ever.
it's elite. Yes, it's in that category. Yes.
They also have their own version of that, and it's quite great.
I used to live on the East Coast, so I know all about a Wegmans. Mine was going to be like Polynesian sauce. Like I put that in everything. Like I literally put that shit on everything. Like I'll make rice and ground turkey, and I put Polynesian sauce on it. It just makes it. I'm so, again, like I'm not good at cooking. Like I don't have the energy at the end of the day. So it's like ground turkey and rice and some greens. And that's like a basic.
I kid you not, like sometimes I get like I just like, and I told the dietitian this before, and like in between calls or something like that, and I'll get like lazy or whatever. I just pick like carb protein fat. So like I'll literally, this was actually a really funny moment. I'll share it. I was on a training last winter, and it was like a 3-day virtual training, and I mean, it's like a 9 to 5 sort of situation. It's pretty intensive. By day two, you feel like, I don't know, like you've gotten close with your virtual group. And typically, like, I didn't even think about it because this is something that I would do, but I guess maybe not on camera. But there weren't a lot of breaks. And so I had my jar of peanut butter out. And like, again, like I wasn't really thinking about it. I've got my jar of peanut butter. I'm just like grabbing a spoon and also like eating my apple. And, just somebody like made a little bit of note. They're like, oh, Maureen, just like love that, bringing out the the jar. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I unclicked mute and I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. Like, COVID has turned me into an animal. I don't know what I'm doing.
Like, we just trying to survive. Okay. First of all, peanut butter is its own food group.
It's
And I
good.
also like classify that as an elite food group. Like I could live off of peanut butter too. I would eat by the jar. Absolutely.
I've often said, like, to the, icebreaker question, if you were on a desert island and you could only eat one thing, what would it be? Peanut butter.
That's a good question, first of all. Um, I like I like questions that really make you think outside the box, so that's a good one. But also, so how these podcasts are going to go, I'm also looping in the audience. So I put up little questions on my Instagram, and then I kind of forgot last week, so I put one up this morning. But so we're going to check it right now in live time
Oh,
and see what the results are. Dun, 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 dun. Okay. So the question was, or it was a poll, sorry, squats or deadlifts? Which one do you like better? I'll ask you
deadlifts.
first. Deadlifts, yeah. Me too. And and let me just say, immediately after I posted this, squats took the lead, and I was like, "What the heck? Like, how is there so many squat people here?" But yeah, it looks like squats winning. They have 30 votes. Deadlifts have 24. So
Mm.
I'm just like, I'm deadlifts all the way. I hate squats.
What's interesting is, like, so personally, on a personal level, like, I have broken my tailbone on two separate occasions. And yeah, just, because the first time wasn't fun enough, so I had to redo
Right.
that. Unfortunately, like what that's wound up doing is like my sacrum's crooked and my coccyx bone is like kind of pushed up underneath of me. And so every once in a while, I will get these nerve impingements. And I've noticed that bilateral lifting, especially squat, like any barbell squats, either back or even front, if I'm being honest, like any sort of like major spinal compression on that is has become very problematic for me over the last several years. And, I think that we have this sort of stigma that it's squatting is a staple movement pattern. And it absolutely, like, I 100% agree. Like, everybody should be able to squat. And, it's a great movement that you want to be able to lift heavy. But it's not the only movement pattern that you can load up heavily and get the same results with. So, for instance, like, I mean, if we look at trap bar deadlifts, and, like, that's not even just me. Like, we have a lot of clients in general population that, you know, maybe they shouldn't be loading up a bilateral squat all the time. I'm not saying like every
Hmm.
once in a while, like maybe you do test it out there, you throw it out there, but I think that there's a lot of folks that, um, really struggle maybe with that position, and that there's safer ways that you can load it up. So, and then the deadlift, there's a lot of different variations that I think is just easier to get into, but then you can also, I think that pulling is something, again, like it really does depend on what your lifestyle is. But for the majority of people, we tend to sit in a lot of hip flexion. So that's just sort of a nice way to, I think, balance out your body. So if you're going to choose one over the other, then that's a great way to do it.
I agree 100%. Also, from a hypermobility lens, something I learned about, um, it was a Jill Zimmerman lecture. She does like these really great case studies, and she's really knowledgeable in hypermobility. And I kind of just started diving into that like surface level because I realized I struggle with that. And what I found was actually prioritizing heavy lifting has helped me a lot with my
Mm-hmm.
hypermobility. And so the deadlift was actually one that she pointed out as a great one for hypermobile folks, which I mean, I consider like, assess and make sure it's the right for that person, but it's basically the compression and that position. And plus, like the pulling, you're not like descending down into the hole of a squat and then having to fight your way out. It's literally just your body's nice and compressed, and then you stand up.
That makes a lot of sense, though. So, one of the other, like, I'm also a yoga instructor, and a lot of yogis are hypermobile, and
Hmm.
they will have the, like you're saying, they'll have the mobility to get into these positions, but they don't necessarily have the control to to stay and really like hold that position. So, I think with a squat, especially if you have somebody that is hypermobile, they can get into some really deep positions, but they might not have that true control of them, so that it's probably a little bit it puts them at a little bit more risk, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, speaking from experience, I used to have a lot of, like, speaking of back pain, I struggle with a lot more SI area, is what it
Hmm.
felt like. So, and it would happen quite often. And my thing was like my ligaments were just kind of lax during certain times of the month. And second, I never trained partial range of motion and full range of motion, like so tempo work, which has been life changing for me. I think just owning the middle parts of different positions first, and then also learning how to find your end range without, going too far has
Yeah.
a lot of power because hypermobile folks kind of don't know when to stop. And then that's kind of when you run into some problems. So it's just really cool to see. I feel like as coaches, like we are our own guinea pigs. Like we kind of trial and error and then figure it out from there.
Yeah, I think the other important thing about like being your own guinea pig, like one, it's really good because you get to have like authentic experience with whatever it is that you're going through. You should always trial your own programs. I believe that. But it's also like important to like the more experience you have with seeing different movement patterns with different bodies, that's going to be super helpful too. It's not just saying like, well, this works for me, so it's going to work for everybody. I mean, and it's also collaborating with other coaches too. Like a lot of times I've been the only female coach on a staff, and they'll be, even just like having that different lens to say, no, like that would be highly uncomfortable for me to do. But then,
Yeah.
just to be able to have that sort of shared perspective and understand, I think like some of those differences is really helpful.
And that's why I'm so excited that Exos has rolled out that women's I forgot what the course is actually called, but that's on my list. It's like the about the menstrual cycle.
Yeah, so
You were a part of that, right?
I like not the actual course itself, but some of the early on trials of the education pieces. Um, I did like a small seminar in New York that was just like part of the trialing of a programming and then education. So that was something that was kind of cool. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for increased research there, but essentially that was something. And this might be a little bit out of realm, but Exos was really testing like uh, providing some education with specific training protocols, and also like testing the voice of this education coming from a male versus a female, and how are
Mm,
those responses. So these are things that um, I think truly need to continue to be tested and asked, and the conversations. I think one of the biggest things that I learned out of this experience, and I think that most of us probably that were involved really learned from this, is how important it is that the conversation even be comfortable and safe and being had, because so many generations of females have not really felt comfortable talking about their, not only like their menstrual cycles, but just their bodies in response to different training protocols. And without having those open conversations, then we can't learn. We also, there's a lot of stories that have been told, generationally, that aren't completely accurate. Um, so anyway, that's a different rabbit hole completely, but I think
yeah.
it's important that there's some education that's out there. And I think that the other big thing is, as all of these courses are starting to surface, which is brilliant and amazing, it's just like anything else. Like science, I'm gonna hop up on my like little
Go on, girl. Get up there.
little soapbox here. But I think that like colloquially, a lot of people have just like thrown out like science. Well, I think that one of the things that people forget about is science is the scientific method is literally testing a hypothesis, right?
Right.
And that's what research is. It's trying like you test out a theory and then you continue to test it. And it's a theory until it gets proven otherwise. So when we talk about like science, it is ever evolving. And just because we find out some information now doesn't mean that it's going to be true and tried. So I think that it's really important that like it's fantastic that this information is getting out there. And I think as practitioners, just like you were saying, a lot of it is trying to obtain as much information as you can, but then also like taking it and experimenting with it and um, trying to find those common links, continuing to have conversations, continuing to learn because there's so much to learn.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. So this is the first year I've actually understood any of it. Like it started all with reading Dr. Stacy Sims' book. And I've since then, like I started a book club with Exos, you remember that.
Hmm.
And then since then, I have referred that book out to so many of my clients and it's helped them in like night and day. It's like they feel more empowered with their bodies and they understand why they feel different ways throughout a month. And it kind of empowers you to just understand, like, okay, there's also like cycle syncing workouts. Do you have to do it? Don't, or do you not? And it really just depends. And there's a lot of stuff out there on the internet and on Instagram about it. But, you know, what I educate my clients is one, them creating that safe environment for them to tell me if something's going on and then educate. So like I won't throw it on them, but if they tell me something's happening, I'm like, "Oh, well, like this is probably why." And we can kind of problem solve together and kind of see as we work together if that is a reoccurring pattern or not. So, yeah, we're kind
That,
of going down this rabbit hole of women's health, but it's so interesting to me.
well, and to piggyback off of that, that's something that is another like a bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I'm so glad that you sort of described that process that you take with a client because I think a lot of times what will wind up happening is that coaches might hear little sound bites about topics that are popular, right, or that are trendy. And they might only be getting, and I'm not like blaming anybody here because I do get, when you're in a service industry and you're providing a service and you're coaching a lot of the time, sometimes it is difficult to really keep up on research and to keep up on conversations and education. So you do need to you need to be intentional about setting aside a time for it. And scrolling Instagram does not count, right? Like there's a lot of maybe idea sparks. I know that like me and a coaching team have definitely utilized Instagram to share some drills or maybe start some conversations, but that's not like you shouldn't be using a lot of that as your facts because what I hear a lot of times happening is that there'll be a soundbite that's taken and then that soundbite gets passed on. Like you as a coach, a lot of times are respected and a lot of times are looked up to provide guidance. And so it would be, I mean, it's within our due diligence to honor that position and to continue, like you said, to empower your clientele to make their own informed decisions. Like being able to recommend a book and to say, like, tell me what you think about this. And then like as you're comfortable, feel free to share some patterns and observations. But you're
Yeah.
really empowering them to take control of their own health and to also like you should not be really like a lot of these, especially when we talk about female cycles and thinking and everything like that. Like it gets very personal. There can be a lot of conversations that take like that can be a little bit polarizing. And I think that again, like it comes back to us to just be a sounding board. Like, we
Yeah.
should not be responsible for anybody like, I just wouldn't want to pass information on as fact if it truly isn't. And I think that that's an easy line to cross sometimes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, I think, like you said, there's a lot of buzzwords out there and it's exciting time and stuff like that. But the best thing we can do, like, kind of to tie this up, like this conversation up, is just to give our clients, the information that we have at our hands, give them the resources, guide them along that journey, and hopefully create a safe space for them to share their findings. And then we can kind of help them come up with a blueprint to reach their goals, because there's not like a certain reps or sets that you need to do at certain times of the month that are going to be like the right one. For me, it really comes down to like how am I feeling, and I base it off of RPE. And I tell my clients that, and so I kind of like to give like that rep range, for example. But I don't think, if you're at like, the luteal phase, and you're shouldn't just go on walks. Like, you can still exercise and do your lifting. Just, if you're feeling good, go for it. And if you're not, then tailor it back to where your energy levels are. So it's kind of just like anybody, like a normal human. Just really tune into your body. And I think that can be a difficult thing to do sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I was to generalize it, I think it does come back to energy management, like you were saying. And I think that this is a theme like across men and women. If we can get people to be a little bit more intuitive about, what is your body saying? Because a lot of times, like, that'll be your first health indicator, and if you start ignoring what it's saying to you, then that's usually where you start running into, some issues down the road.
Absolutely. Well, kind of speaking of on that, like running into like issues down the road, I really wanted to touch on, in your experience, have you faced moments of adversity or like kind of any roadblocks in your journey into kind of where you are now?
Yeah. So I appreciate this question just because I think that it's a good one. Um, it gets real,
It does. This is where we get to know you.
My journey has not been an easy one, and I mean that both like personally and professionally. Um, as frustrating as that has been at times, like I do realize um, that it has truly afforded me the opportunity to overcome obstacles. And because nothing was handed to me, I did truly feel like I needed to um, earn everything that I have in life. Um, it's like I do think that that did teach me a lot, and it taught me like a lot about who I was. And um, everyone does love a good comeback story, right? And I not to be like super super vague, but like some of the things, like I lost my mom when I was 16 years old, and it was like fairly unexpectedly. Um, I've had several really close deaths in my life. I've gone through several toxic relationships. I've been a part of, like one of the very few female coaches in this field. I didn't really have anybody like supporting my college education, right? And so there's a lot of things that I needed to figure out and trial, and that it took me longer probably to get through in a lot of different areas. But each one of those, like I think that because of that, it gave me a lot of hunger. And those are those sorts of moments where, you know, you can either bury your head in the sand, or you can just take inventory and you can say, like, okay, what did I learn from this? How do I rise? And to also understand that, those like roadblocks, especially ones that you can't control, they're going to happen, not just once. And that was something that, I think that I really didn't want to know.
Yeah.
But now I can look back at that and I can say that, it's how you pick yourself up. And I think that that was something that probably Rocky said, to tell you the truth. But like, I think that it's not really like how you fall. It's truly like how do you pick yourself back up and how do you change that each time. And that's really resilience. That's what evolution looks like. It's saying like, okay, this happened. How do I do this? How do I do this differently? And you know, so it's I don't know. I mean, like a lot of that has made me stronger. Um, it's interesting too because I think another lesson that I've kind of learned that was difficult as like a manager is just because I've gone through really hard adversity pieces, especially like in my earlier career where I felt like I really had to prove myself a lot, doesn't mean that it should be that hard for the next generation either. So I also had to kind of like check myself and realize that I don't need to make this harder on the next generation just because like I went through all of these steps and they didn't. That's a good thing, right? Like
Yeah,
that's actually like really good. Because in ways like maybe some of the lessons that I learned or the pain that I went through made it easier for that next generation or that next piece. There's some of the positions that I've held, like I was the first one and they had to get backfilled, which is actually really amazing. That means that there was a proof of concept, right? Um, and it just made it so much easier for whoever that next person was to, pop in and that's fantastic. That's the way it should work. So I think that that's
absolutely.
also that was something that was interesting that I think that it's easy. I think also for that older generation, not that I'm quite there, but I think it's easy for them to be bitter sometimes, to say like, well, that's not the way that we had to do it, but that's not always a bad thing. I think that there's always just like that balance though, right?
I just wanted to really thank you for sharing all that with me because, like, it's hard to open up and talk about the things that are really hard. But you said so many, like, there's a few points I really liked that you said, which was like, how do I rise? And it's like being in that low point. Like, that's like the only thing you think about is how can I get out of here? And then sometimes you don't even know you're in that era or that moment of getting out. It kind of just it feels like a blur, and then someday you look back and you're like, wow, I felt like this. Like I felt like I was in a hole and I couldn't get out. Also, for you to also say you got to check yourself sometimes. Like that's such a testament to you as a leader that you don't hold on to the bitterness of how hard it was for you to come up. And especially being a woman in this industry, it's so important to pave the way for other women, coming through because I still feel like inferior sometimes where I feel like I have to constantly prove myself and know more and keep doing the work and I can never be happy with where I am and it's kind of exhausting. So I think I don't know if that's just a human thing or if that's how it is being like kind of like I don't want to say minority, but kind of in strength and conditioning. And so I just have to say thank you because what you did was so important and it means a lot to everybody whether they say it or not and maybe they don't know, but like just know that you took the step to make a positive change for a lot of other people.
No, I appreciate that, Emma. And I think that I mean, so much of that is just the people that I've had in my life, right? Like I feel like I've been really fortunate where there's been a lot of people around me to show me this like pathway that they held integrity with. And, um, like it just goes to show you, I think, to your point, like what you just said, like a lot of people will have no idea the amount of impact that they may or may not have had on me. And like I try to offer a thank you where I can, but there's people like my high school coach. My high school tennis coach. She will always be a huge part of my life, and I think that she like knows that on some level. But I mean, she's a person that I think about routinely, and just say
Yeah.
like, I'm really glad that that person was there in my life at that time.
Oh, it's so cool. I
Hmm.
love that. I while we're on this kind of last thing here to wrap it up, what is one piece of advice that you could give your younger self?
I'm glad you gave me this ahead of time. I'll share that with
Yeah.
the audience. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
just gonna whip this one out, okay?
I would never do that to my people.
For the future guest.
Yeah. Just letting you know there's like yes, there's a plan. There
There's a method to the madness.
is, I promise.
Um, yeah, I had to do a little bit of thinking about this, but I think that it's to not to be afraid to show up fully for the moments that matter. And so that means letting go of your self-limiting beliefs and not numbing your feelings. Taking pause to listen to your body is and what it's saying in a specific instance, like we talked about. Your body is so intelligent, and um, it truly does hold a lot of our emotions and a lot of our pain. So, really being able to listen to it, kind of a lot of what we talked about earlier, honoring your values, that takes courage and it takes constant reevaluation. We tend to think of time as a linear concept. And like we talked about earlier, that puts a lot of pressure on us, I think, to have things done by a certain time and to compare ourselves with others. But when you are truly listening to yourself and understanding your values and holding yourself accountable for your own actions and for what it is that you want out of life, I do truly believe that everything will unfold as it's meant to. So I think that it comes down to really, like, if I was to really summarize all of that, not not living in fear. And it's kind of a lot of what we've been talking about too. That means the opposite of fear is being vulnerable, and that
Hmm.
takes courage.
Facts. I loved that. It's hard to do though, getting out of your own way. Like we can be our biggest critic, our biggest roadblock is ourself. For some reason, the no's that we're told in our life stand out more than the yeses, I
Hmm.
feel like. For some reason the negatives, even though there's less, can sometimes outweigh all the positives. So it's just learning how to filter out those negatives and kind of channel them into a positive. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
That was super well said too. I think you're right. Like the no's do stand out more than the yeses, and that's human nature. I think to bias negativity. I know that that's something that I've definitely struggled with, and probably still do sometimes. It's really easy to only focus on the negatives, but if you can take a step back and get out of your own way, because we really are like the biggest limiting factor, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
Well, Maureen, this was so nice. Like, first of all, just to chat with you because the last time I really talked to you was at the mentorship last year,
Mm,
a
yeah,
year ago, which was so fun, by the way. If anybody, Exos, you've not done it, please do it. It's so fun. It's just like high class gym, high class experience. You meet people from all over the world. Super cool.
a good immersion experience is like worth its weight in gold, I think. So yeah,
Yeah.
agreed.
Yeah, well, if you guys like this episode, please make sure you like, subscribe, share with a friend. I wouldn't be mad with a 5-star rating. Um, um, yeah, and just come back every Sunday for your morning cup episodes. Hopefully, you can get cozy, listen in, and we'll see you next time.